Hello, Shadow Stalkers, and a very happy Halloween. Today, I have a spine-chilling treat for you. This story is part 2 of a special 2-part series. To fully understand the tale, you'll need to visit my good friend Neon Static's channel for part 1, which will be linked in the description. If you've already listened to her reading, then get ready, because it's time to dive into the eerie continuation of our Halloween story. Let's begin. There was another card waiting for me that morning. The mailman put our real, proper mail into the locked box. Whoever had been sending these preferred to shove them halfway underneath the front door. I'd torn this one a bit when I pulled the door open, and now it sat there half in, half out of the house. It looked like bait. For a moment, I felt that intense weight of eyes and looked for the telltale shimmer of fishing line, expecting to see it pulled away like a lure. But there was no line. I stooped to pick it up, turning it over in my hands. No name. Just an envelope, light blue. I turned it over and opened it. Another greeting card. Valerie? I heard my mother behind me. I turned, shoving the card into my bag before she could see it. You ready to go to school? I smiled back. Sure, I chirped, trying to appear like everything was normal, even though, well, it wasn't. About 8 months before, in the middle of summer vacation, my parents had announced a move across the country. The very day my father left ahead of us to close on a house I'd had no idea they were even looking at, and a fleet of rented vans pulled up our drive. The bite of toast that had stuck and lodged when they'd announced this sudden move felt like it remained stuck in my throat as I watched all of my things packed up and carted away from the only home I'd ever lived in, like an impatient parent cutting a story off halfway by snapping the book shut and just saying, "The end." And that was that. More details emerged. The move was for my dad's job, a big promotion. And my mom went back to work too, citing that Chicago had a lot more opportunity for her to rejoin the workforce than our last dozy little town. They encouraged me to settle in and take advantage of things like an actual mall, one with name-brand stores and crowds of people hustling through, bags crinkling at their sides. I hit the stores, marveling at the selection, the staging, how each one seemed to have their own signature look. Even the mannequins were different from store to store, a range from very modern, faceless white forms down to a store that had some that looked as old-timey as ventriloquist dummies, dapper men with rosy cheeks. I must have signed up for a dozen loyalty cards my first week, finally living in a town where they had stores with loyalty programs, and those random $5 off coupons would do more than crease and stain in the bottom of my school bag until long after they expired. Real teen girl stuff. Yet, I sensed something else was up. My mother had always been tightly wound, but lately she just seemed off. Short with my father in a way that bordered on downright rude, which she'd never been. But my dad wasn't snippy in return. He seemed resigned to it. There were lots of talks late at night, just the two of them, when they thought I was asleep. I granted them this. After all, we all had our secrets. Things we wanted to deal with alone. And I had this one. Even driving to school, that card was on my mind. It wasn't the first card. They were jammed in under the door, tucked under my windshield wiper. I'd opened 2 of them, but the messages inside were just the pre-printed messages. A card with a light bulb shaped like a heart. You light up my life. Or, the joy of seeing you one more time, on a card with a grinning clock with hard eyes. Punny, but beyond these printed messages, there was only a signature of a single stylized eye, with lashes but no eyebrow, drawn in ballpoint pen. That's it. Nothing beyond their placement that even indicated they were for me. I would have wondered if there'd been some mix-up if not for the weight of eyes. Because, yeah, I was getting this feeling, more and more, that I was being watched. Sometimes out in public, where I could chalk it up to a people watcher letting their eyes track movement. But more unsettlingly, when I was home too. My bedroom was on the second floor, partially blocked by a big tree in the front yard. I scanned its branches more than once when I'd feel the prickle of hair rising on my skin, feel a heat trace like my chills were following the tracing of eyes on me. But there was no one there, nor beyond the tree, on the sidewalk, where a streetlight threw a spotlight that would have revealed anyone peeking up. That signature in the card of an eye was all too fitting, because I felt eyes on me. But what could I do? There was nothing real there, nothing to report. The cards could be a mix-up, and the feeling that someone was looking at me sounded a little crazy. It could just be the feeling of being so new to a large city. And with my parents fighting, there was never a good time to add the hard-to-describe thing to them. I just shoved the cards away, deep down in my nightstand drawer, and decided to wait it out. Surely, with time, it would just go away. That afternoon, the afternoon of the blue envelope under the door, I came home from school. My parents were both at work, and I looked at the garage from the front porch, where I was up just high enough to see in the row of small windows along the top of the rolling door. As suspected, both cars gone. Home alone, I thought, as I jammed my key into the lock and shoved the door open. My phone dinged just as I stepped inside. I checked it. Another loyalty card coupon, this one for 15% off select read, unsaleable items. I pocketed the phone, dumped off my backpack on the shoe bench, then wandered through my usual routine to the kitchen for a snack, maybe a soda, and then upstairs to throw myself onto my bed and scroll social media for posts from my friends back home. I had my head in the refrigerator, looking for a yogurt, when I thought I heard something. I stilled, trying to tell if it was coming from the fridge, and after a moment the thunk came again, closer, confirming it. I knew that sound by now. Some internal mechanism would whir into action, setting up more ice cubes in the automatic dispenser within minutes of someone having dispensed ice. I congratulated myself on not freaking out and began my search for yogurt again. Wait. That sound came when someone had just, maybe within the last few minutes, used the automatic ice maker. But my parents were both gone. Would have left just after my leaving for school, leaving no one in the house to use the ice maker. My skin prickled into goosebumps, and like a gazelle realizing too late that they've lowered their head to the wrong watering hole, I had the impression that someone who'd recently helped themselves to a cool drink on a warm day, was right behind me. I spun, leaping aside and jamming my elbow hard on the door of the fridge, sending the bottles of condiments clacking. No one was behind me. No one was there. I stood still again, waiting, counting a count in my head that I promptly lost track of, and heard nothing. Great. I'm losing my mind. I closed the fridge and headed upstairs, abandoning the idea of a snack. I was already full of frustration at myself. I stopped in the doorway, and without being able to explain why, I scanned my bedroom. I didn't know why, but something about it felt off. My eyes saw it, the one thing out of place, the one inexplicable thing, but my brain didn't quite catch on until I stepped towards it and looked down. A water ring was on the desk, the kind you get from a cold glass, condensation running down its sides because the ice inside is colder than the ambient air. Outside, the bang of car doors. I stepped to the window and looked down, seeing my parents in the driveway. They must have assumed I wasn't home, or couldn't hear them through the windows because my mom was full on yelling at my father, her hands flung around like she was presenting a case. And my dad was standing there, the back of his neck flushing red, taking it all the same. I looked back to the ring of water on my desk. I willed myself not to freak out, told myself somehow I had left it that morning, and the humidity. My God, the Midwest was humid, had retained it all this time. I understood I was talking myself down, but with the very uncertain, terrifying thing happening with my own parents, I just couldn't handle facing another challenge. The next morning, I took no chances. I took my phone and, standing in my doorway, snapped a picture of how everything looked. Off to school. No weird cards in the door. None in my windshield wiper either, for a change. Good. See? Ignoring it made it stop, I told myself, not believing a word. I made it home. Still no card in the door, nor in the actual mail. The house wasn't silent, because my mother didn't work Fridays. While the tension remained, it was relaxed a bit when my father wasn't around. I stuck to her like glue, helping her with laundry, then dinner. She noticed my attentiveness and asked if I was okay. I didn't know how to tell her. Not about the cards, the scrawled eyes for signatures, the weight of 2 real eyes on me, nor about my awareness that between her and my dad, something was wrong. I just hemmed, then said I missed hanging out with her. She looked a little uncertain. She liked what I said, but didn't entirely buy it. But before she could pry, my father came home and swoop. Ice wall back in place, remaining through a stilted dinner and a fog that, as I trudged upstairs, I prayed would stay on the ground floor. I was tired. They'd barely let me hit the 2nd floor before I heard them start in again, getting sloppy and not fighting around me, whatever beef they had now brimming over. All at once, I was pissed. Pissed at them for uprooting my life, bringing me to a strange-ass city, and leaving me to figure it out while they could barely keep their yelling contained. Pissed that the fight that so clearly started all this upheaval in my life was being kept from me, like I was some dumb toddler who had no importance, no say. Pissed that this weird-ass city had me feeling itchy, like no matter where I was being... I turned into my room and saw, from the window, a man's face staring directly at me. I shrieked, flinging myself backwards and stumble-tripping down the stairs. Forget talking myself out of it. Forget the skip-scan-skip patience of searching a room for clues. I ran, screaming my fool head off, past both astonished parents and outside, directly for the tree. I had the impression of that face, that long, angular man's face, flushed with the heat of the late autumn, staring into my 2nd floor window, and there was only one way anyone could be up high enough to be there. They had to be in the tree. I couldn't solve what was going on with my parents, but by God I could, and would solve this, and I'd solve it tonight. I ran at the tree and, rearing back, I threw my feet into it, kicking it as hard as I could. It was an old tree, and thus, fully grown and thick, but I attacked it, wanting to shake it so hard that whoever was up in its branches would lose their grip and come tumbling down. Behind me, my parents ran up, asking me what was wrong, what was I doing, what was going on. But I was screaming, throwing myself at the tree over and over, howling at the man who was up there, who'd been shadowing me, maybe even in my room. And from the branches below, something heavy fell, but not heavy enough. It bounced and made a cracking sound, small, bowling ball sized. It rolled to me, its eyes wide. A head? I shrieked, but my brain was catching up, throttling the sound into a squeak. Not a real head. It was a mannequin head. The side of its high and tight plastic molded hair was cracked from where it landed on the ground, but its cheerful eyes were shining up at me from above rosy cheeks. I felt a shudder of dread in recognition, but my parents were already pulling me back behind them. My mom's arms were locked around me, and she was crying, sobbing really, saying over and over again how sorry she was that they hadn't told me. My father was fuming. He picked up the head, its eyes remaining fixed on mine, cheeky, leering, and stormed into the house with a lot of thunderous words like, "That's it, and too far." And that night, my parents told me what had happened. My father had gotten close with a co-worker back in our small town. Too close. They hadn't crossed a physical line, but it had been enough that he'd come clean with my mom, and she with her spouse. My mom was upset, but the lady's husband, furious, enraged. And the harassment had started. My parents wouldn't go into details, and I was far too preoccupied to press them, but it had gotten so bad my dad had put in for a transfer, hoping distance would sate the wrath of the wronged husband. But it hadn't. My parents had been receiving emails, phone calls, at work and home. They'd been collecting them, weighing if they were enough to act, to go to the police. They'd moved cross-country. What more could this man want? But that their daughter was now drawn into the mix crossed that line. My dad took the mannequin head and whatever files, printed emails, phone logs he had, and he drove that night to file a restraining order. I guess it solved the question of the angry husband back in Utah. But even as my parents began to settle, to resume their roles outside of the drama that I'd lived in for months, I felt no relief. I recognized it. In moving to this big city, I'd felt off-kilter. Where I'd come from, everyone knew everyone, and it was disorienting to glance around, realizing I was always looking for someone I knew. But I knew no one. Every face was just another face in the crowd of drivers, of students, of shoppers. And I'd taken it for granted that, as all the people around me sort of blurred in a big city hustle, so would I blur, fade into the background. But maybe I hadn't. Maybe one of those friendly salespeople, cheerily taking my information, my name, my phone number, my mailing address, which was my home address, was paying attention that day, and had been ever since. My parents had chalked up the mannequin head and all those weird cards to the husband, messing with me to mess with them. But it wasn't him. I had that mannequin head burned into my memory. It was familiar. And only one store had had those, the old-timey city sport busts for the display of sunglasses and hats. And later on, as I stood in the food court, staring at the plate glass windows, staring through them, I could see their dandy little Errol Flynn faces grinning back, at me and at the sales guy, the same one who'd taken my info. And as I watched, I saw him scan, then double-take his gaze back to a girl browsing sweaters. Saw his eyes lock on as he picked up his little clipboard, the same one he'd used to write my information. And wasn't that strange, when so many of the other stores signed you up through the credit card keypad? I saw a slow, shark-like grin bleed across his lips as he sauntered over to her. And as he smiled, watching her, he had no idea I was watching, and my own lips were twisting into a smirk. Let's see how you like it, I thought, as I waited, eyes on him. Thank you for listening to my story today. I hope it added a little extra creepiness to your Halloween. If you haven't already, be sure to check out part 1 of this story over on our good friend Neon Static's channel. If you enjoyed this tale, stay tuned. I've got plenty more stories coming your way. Feel free to drop a like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Until then, have a very happy Halloween, and remember to watch out for the boogeyman.